The minimalist digital clock on the wall cast a soft glow in the cavernous silence of the Silicon Valley estate, each second clicking by with sterile precision through the empty glass-walled corridors. Richard "Rick" Thompson, a man in his late 50s with perfectly coiffed silver hair and weary blue eyes, adjusted his European silk tie in front of an ornate, gold-leaf mirror in the foyer. His reflection showed a face etched by success and a deep underlying bitterness, the sharp lines around his eyes telling stories of long-forgotten laughter. His footsteps, sharp and lonely, echoed on the polished concrete floors as he moved through the vast open-plan rooms. Floor-to-ceiling windows, typically showcasing a panoramic view of the valley, were now being streaked by rain, plunging the house into an artificial twilight. Museum-quality modern art hung on the walls, silent witnesses to a life dedicated to amassing a tech empire, yet utterly devoid of human connection. In the state-of-the-art kitchen, Rick opened the Sub-Zero refrigerator. Shelves laden with gourmet delicacies from a private chef stared back at him, but nothing sparked his appetite. He shut the stainless steel door with a sigh, his stomach feeling as hollow as his heart. Walking into his home office, Rick sat behind an imposing glass and chrome desk. Stacks of documents and venture capital reports covered the polished surface. His eyes scanned the numbers, figures that once filled him with a surge of pride, but now seemed as insignificant as lines of code in an obsolete program. A loud crack of thunder rattled the massive panes of glass, pulling Rick from his dark thoughts. He stood and walked to the expansive window overlooking the meticulously landscaped grounds. Outside, the sky was a churning bruise of gray, heavy clouds gathering over the horizon. The first raindrops began to fall, tapping against the glass in an accelerating rhythm. Rick watched, mesmerized, as the storm gathered strength. The wind howled, bending the imported Japanese maples in the garden, their leaves dancing in a frenzy. It was then that something unusual caught his attention. Through the thick curtain of rain, two small figures appeared at the high-tech security gate of the estate. Rick squinted, a flicker of disbelief crossing his features. They were two little girls, identical as 2 pixels on a screen, no older than 7. The twins, soaked by the torrential downpour, carried bouquets of colorful flowers that stood out in stark, vivid contrast against the gray backdrop. Their blonde hair was plastered to their rosy cheeks, framing radiant smiles that seemed to defy the storm itself. Rick felt his heart hammer in his chest, an emotion he hadn't felt in years. What were those children doing out there, alone in the middle of a tempest? Why were they carrying flowers? And why, despite the relentless rain, were they smiling as though the California sun was shining brightly? Without a second thought, Rick moved away from the window, his footsteps quickening through the empty house as he headed toward the front door. His hand trembled slightly as he disengaged the electronic lock, a mix of curiosity and a strange apprehension taking hold of him. The cold wind and rain hit him the moment he opened the door, but Rick barely noticed. His eyes were fixed on the 2 girls who were now walking up the stone pathway toward the mansion. They walked hand in hand, their crystalline laughter just audible above the storm's roar. As they drew closer, Rick could see their eyes a bright, vivid green, full of an innocence and joy he hadn't encountered in years. The girls stopped a few steps from the entrance, lifting their gazes to meet the tall, austere man observing them. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Rick, the lonely tech mogul whose life was defined by algorithms and stock prices, was staring at 2 children whose very existence seemed to defy the cold, calculating logic of his world. The twins smiled in unison, extending their soaked bouquets toward Rick. Their lips moved, uttering words that were initially drowned out by the roar of the storm. Rick instinctively leaned forward, seized by an inexplicable urgency to hear what they had to say. When the words finally reached his ears, Rick felt as if the ground had vanished beneath his feet. His breath caught in his throat, and he gripped the doorframe for balance. The flowers trembled in the girls' hands, raindrops sliding down the colorful petals. Their smiles remained intact, their green eyes fixed on Rick with an intensity that seemed to pierce his soul. In that moment, as the storm raged around him, Rick Thompson felt something inside him break. An invisible barrier he had built over the years, isolating himself from the world and his own emotions, began to crumble. The twins' words echoed in his mind, challenging everything he believed he knew about himself and the world. Rick stood there, paralyzed in the threshold of his mansion, unable to move or speak, while the rain continued its merciless downpour. What did these mysterious children want? Where had they come from? And why did their simple words have the power to shake the foundations of his meticulously constructed existence? As these questions swirled in his mind, Rick found himself faced with a choice. He could close the door, return to the safety of his isolated world, and forget this strange encounter, or he could step forward into the rain, into the unknown, and discover what these girls and their flowers might signify. The storm continued, unrelenting, and Rick Thompson, the lonely millionaire, was about to make a decision that would change the course of his life forever. Rain fell in cascades, transforming the carefully tended garden into an aquatic scene. Still reeling from the sight of the twins, Rick hesitated for a moment on the doorstep. His gaze drifted back to the foyer, landing on a sleek black umbrella forgotten in an oak coat stand. On impulse, he grabbed it and took a hesitant step outside. The wind whipped his face as he opened the umbrella with trembling hands, raindrops drumming against the black fabric, creating a chaotic symphony. Rick walked along the stone path, his expensive Italian shoes sinking into the waterlogged grass. The twins remained motionless, like two colorful statues against the gray of the storm. Their flowery dresses, now clinging to their small bodies, dripped incessantly. Still, their smiles did not waver, shining like beacons in the dark afternoon. Are you all right?" Rick's voice came out almost inaudible beneath the roar of the rain. It was the first time in years he had addressed a child. The girls exchanged a knowing glance before replying in unison. "We're fine, sir. We came to bring you flowers." Rick frowned in confusion. Flowers? In this weather? For whom? The twin on the right, with a small beauty mark under her left eye, took a step forward. "I'm Emma," she said, her voice surprisingly clear. "And this is my sister, Olivia." Olivia waved shyly, clutching her bouquet to her chest. "The flowers are for you, sir," she murmured, her voice nearly swallowed by the noise of the storm. Rick blinked, astonished. "For me? But why?" Emma held out her own bouquet, a vibrant mix of daisies, sunflowers, and tulips. "Because you need them." The simplicity of the answer caught him off guard. Rick looked at the flowers, then back at the girls' smiling faces. Something in those green eyes unsettled him, as if they could see right through the layers of coldness and bitterness he had built over the years. "You don't even know me?" he argued, his shaky voice betraying his confusion. "How can you know if I need flowers?" Olivia stepped forward, joining her sister. "Everyone needs flowers once in a while, sir, especially when they're sad." The words hit him like a punch to the stomach. Rick felt his defenses rise instinctively. "I'm not sad," he retorted, more harshly than he intended. The twins didn't flinch at his tone. Instead, their smiles widened, as though they shared a secret he couldn't possibly understand. "Flowers don't lie, sir," Emma said softly. "They know when a heart is broken." Rick felt his breath hitch. How could these children, these strangers, see so clearly what he had worked so hard to hide? "You don't know anything about me," he muttered, more to himself than to them. Olivia tilted her head, her eyes shining with a wisdom that seemed far beyond her years. "We don't need to know everything. The flowers guide us to those who need them." At that moment, a flash of lightning cut across the sky, illuminating the garden with a white glare. In that brief moment of intense light, Rick saw something in the girl's eyes that made him recoil. It wasn't just innocence or kindness, but a profound, ancient understanding that seemed impossible for children so young. Who are you, really?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Emma and Olivia exchanged another glance before turning their attention back to Rick. Then, in perfect sync, they extended their bouquets and spoke words that left him completely frozen. These flowers are to heal broken hearts and bring back the smile. The world around Rick seemed to freeze. The rain, the wind, even the rumbling thunder appeared to mute. All he could hear was the echo of those words in his mind, repeating endlessly. Long-suppressed memories broke through to the surface of his consciousness. His wife Emily's laughter echoing through the now silent corridors of the mansion. His daughter Grace's smile, as bright as the sun on a summer day. Then the darkness that followed, losing them, swallowing all the light and joy in his life. Rick staggered, feeling the weight of years of unprocessed grief threatening to crush him. The umbrella slipped from his numb fingers, landing in the grass with a dull thud. The rain now fell freely on him, mingling with the tears that began to trail down his face. For the first time in years, Rick Thompson allowed himself to feel the pain he had buried so deeply. Emma and Olivia watched in silence, their small faces a mixture of compassion and resolve. Slowly, like approaching a wounded animal, they took a step toward him. "It's all right, sir," Emma murmured softly. "The flowers are here to help." Olivia nodded, adding, "They have the power to heal, if you let them." Rick looked up, his reddened eyes meeting the twins. For a moment, he saw a reflection of his own lost daughter in them, and his heart clenched painfully. "How?" he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "How can simple flowers heal? This?" He gestured vaguely at his chest, where the pain felt deepest. The twins smiled in unison, a smile so full of compassion and understanding that Rick felt his last defenses crumble. "Flowers are just the beginning," Emma gently explained. "They open the path to healing," Olivia finished the thought. "But you need to be willing to follow that path." Rick looked at the colorful bouquets, still fresh and vibrant despite the torrential rain. Something about those flowers, the purity of their colors, the delicacy of their petals, struck a chord, long silenced in his heart. With trembling hands he reached out, accepting the bouquets from the twins. The soft, comforting fragrance of the flowers filled his senses, bringing with it memories of happier times. "And now?" he asked, his voice barely audible above the sound of the rain. Emma and Olivia exchanged a knowing look before answering in unison. "Now, sir, you begin your journey back to the light." As the twins' words hung in the air, mingling with the rain and wind, Rick felt something shift inside him. It was as if a long-shuttered window had been opened, allowing a ray of hope to penetrate the darkness of his heart. There, drenched by the rain, holding bouquets of flowers and facing two mysterious girls, Rick Thompson took the first step on a journey that would change his life forever, a journey of healing, of rediscovery, and perhaps of redemption. The storm continued to rage around him, but for the first time in years, Rick no longer felt lost in the darkness. The flowers in his hands were a tangible reminder that even in the darkest moments, beauty and hope could still blossom. The rain continued to pour mercilessly as Rick, still holding the soaked bouquets, looked at the twins with a mixture of confusion and fascination. The fragrance of the flowers, intensified by the dampness, stirred something deep in his memory, a familiar scent he couldn't fully place. You can't stay out here in this storm," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. The words came out hesitantly, as if he were unaccustomed to showing concern. "Come inside, please. Let's get dry." Emma and Olivia exchanged a quick glance before nodding in unison. They followed Rick through the mansion's entrance, their small steps leaving wet footprints on the pristine concrete floor. Crossing the threshold, Rick was hit by a wave of memories. The foyer, once a symbol of his success and isolation, now felt strangely empty. His eyes fell on a picture frame turned face down on a minimalist side table, the only photo he hadn't had the courage to remove entirely. "Sir?" Olivia's gentle voice brought him back to the present. "Are you all right?" Rick blinked, realizing he had been standing still, lost in thought. "Yes, I'm fine." He hesitated, then added, "You can call me Rick." The girls smiled, their faces lighting up in a way that made Rick's heart ache painfully. For a moment, he saw the reflection of another smile, one he hadn't seen in years except in his most tormented dreams. "Rick," Emma repeated, as if testing the name. "It's a nice name." He guided them to the living room, a spacious area decorated with expensive designer furniture and valuable art, but the twins' eyes were drawn to the unlit gas fireplace, as cold as the rest of the house. "You must be cold," Rick murmured, suddenly aware of the lack of warmth in his own home. He moved to light the fireplace with a remote, his fingers trembling slightly. As the flames began to crackle, casting a golden glow around the room, Rick felt a sharp pang of déjà vu. For an instant, it wasn't his mansion's fireplace he saw, but a small, wood-burning stove in a cramped, chilly room. The smell of burning wood mingled with the fragrance of the flowers, and suddenly, Rick was transported to his deepest memories. He was 8 years old again, curled up in a narrow bed in a foster home, watching the flames dance in the small stove while the wind howled outside. "Rick?" Emma's voice brought him back to the present. "You look sad again." He turned to face the twins, who watched him with a blend of curiosity and compassion. For a moment, Rick considered denying it, hiding behind the mask of indifference he had worn for so long. But something in the girls' eyes, a wisdom beyond their years, made him hesitate. I was remembering," he admitted, his voice low, "when I was a child, in a foster home." The twins didn't look surprised at his revelation. Instead, Olivia approached, extending a small hand to touch Rick's arm. "Sometimes remembering hurts," she said softly, "but it can also heal." The girl's words brought another wave of memories. Rick found himself reliving moments he had tried so desperately to forget. The stifling loneliness of the foster system, the cold nights, the desperate longing for a family. And then, like a ray of sun breaking through dark clouds, he remembered the day he met Emily. Her warm smile, her contagious laughter, the way she made him feel complete for the first time in his life. The memory of Emily brought with it the image of Grace, their daughter. The girl's bright eyes, just like her mother's, her laughter echoing through the corridors of the mansion, bringing life and joy to every corner. Rick felt his legs give out, and he sank heavily into a nearby armchair. The twins watched silently, their eyes filled with a compassion that seemed impossible for children so young. "I lost them," he whispered, the words escaping before he could stop them. "My wife, Emily, and our daughter Grace, 3 years ago. 3. The silence that followed was broken only by the soft crackling of the fire. Rick closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his loss as if it were yesterday. When he opened them again, he saw Emma and Olivia standing before him, their small faces serious and attentive. "It was an accident," he continued, his voice thick. "I should have been with them, but I was stuck in a business meeting. When I got the news—" His voice faltered, the pain of the memory too fresh to articulate. The twins moved in unison, each placing a hand over Rick's. "The flowers knew," Emma said softly. "They always know where there are broken hearts." Olivia nodded, adding, "And they brought us to you, Rick, to help heal." Rick looked at the girls, then at the bouquets still in his hands. Despite the rain, the flowers seemed more vibrant than ever, their colors contrasting sharply with the mansion's somber atmosphere. "How?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "How can simple flowers heal something like this?" Emma smiled, a smile so gentle and empathetic that Rick's heart ached. "Flowers are just the beginning," she explained. "They remind us that even after the harshest winter, spring always returns." "And with it," Olivia added, "the chance to bloom again." Rick felt something break inside him, not painfully, but as if a long-erected dam had finally given way. Tears he had held back for 3 long years began to flow freely. The twins remained beside him, their silent presence offering a comfort Rick hadn't realized he so desperately needed. While the storm raged outside and the fire crackled softly in the fireplace, Rick Thompson began, slowly and painfully, to unearth the memories he had locked away. And there, in the presence of two mysterious little girls and their magical bouquets, he took the first tentative step toward healing. The silence that followed Rick's weeping was broken by the soft rumble of a stomach. Emma blushed, placing a hand over her belly, while Olivia tried to stifle a giggle. Rick blinked, as if waking from a trance. "You must be hungry," he murmured, his voice still husky with emotion. I can prepare something." The twins exchanged surprised looks. "You know how to cook?" Emma asked, curious. A shy smile, the first in years, appeared on Rick's face. "Not very well," he admitted, "but I can make tea and maybe find some cookies." Minutes later, the once cold, impersonal kitchen came to life. The aroma of chamomile tea filled the air, mingling with the scent of vanilla cookies Rick had found in the back of a cabinet. The twins perched on high stools, watching with fascination as he moved clumsily around the kitchen. "So," Rick began, setting the steaming cups in front of the girls, "you mentioned a shelter? Hope Haven, right?" Olivia nodded, blowing gently on her tea. "That's where we live. It's a few blocks from here." "You're orphans?" The question came out hesitantly, loaded with his own painful history. Emma shrugged, nibbling on a cookie. "We are, but we have each other and the other kids at the shelter. And Mrs. Jenkins, she takes care of us." Rick felt a lump in his throat. The casual way the girls spoke of their situation caught him off guard. "And the flowers? How did that start?" The twins smiled in unison, their eyes shining with a special light. "It was Mrs. Jenkins's idea," Olivia explained. "She said spreading joy is the best way to find it, so we started handing out flowers in the neighborhood. To people who look sad or lonely," Emma continued. Rick frowned in confusion. "But how do you know who needs flowers?" The girls exchanged a mischievous glance before Olivia answered, "The flowers guide us. They always know who needs them." There was something about the simplicity of her response that touched Rick deeply. He remembered the garden Emily used to tend, the hours she spent among the rose bushes and lilies. Grace loved to help her, small fingers carefully pulling weeds and watering the plants. "My daughter," he found himself saying. She also loved flowers, especially daisies. The twins looked at him with renewed interest. "What was her name?" Emma asked softly. "Grace," Rick answered, the word coming out like a whisper. "She would be—" He paused, doing the math. "She'd be 10 now." A gentle silence settled over the kitchen. Rick felt a solitary tear roll down his cheek, but he didn't wipe it away. For the first time in years, the memory of Grace didn't bring only pain. It also brought a tender warmth. "She must have been a very special girl," Olivia said finally, her voice full of compassion. Rick nodded, unable to speak for a moment. When he finally found his voice, it was thick with emotion. "She was. She lit up every room she walked into. Just like you two." The words slipped out before he could think, and Rick was surprised by his own honesty. The twins smiled, their faces lighting up in a way that made Rick's heart ache and swell simultaneously. "That's why we give out flowers," Emma explained. "To bring a bit of that light back to people who've lost it." Rick looked at the bouquets, still fresh despite the rain, resting on the kitchen counter. "Do you think you can bring that light back to me?" Olivia reached out and gently touched Rick's arm. "The light never really left, Mr. Rick. It's just hiding behind clouds for now." The wisdom in the girl's words caught him off guard. Rick felt something stir inside him, as though a ray of sun had finally found a crack in his carefully constructed armor. "You two," he began, his voice trembling slightly. "You remind me so much of her. Grace, I mean." She had that same glow. The twins smiled, a smile so full of understanding and compassion that it made Rick's heart ache in a way he hadn't felt in years. "Maybe," Emma suggested softly, "that's why the flowers brought us here today." Rick looked at the girls, then at the bouquets, and back at the half-empty teacups. The kitchen, which for so long had been a cold and lifeless space, now felt warm, filled with the aroma of tea and cookies and the soft sound of children's voices. In that moment, Rick felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time: hope. It was a fragile feeling, as delicate as the first spring bud after a harsh winter. But it was there, undeniable and persistent. "Thank you," he whispered, not just to the twins, but to the universe that had brought them to his door on that rainy afternoon. Emma and Olivia smiled in response, their eyes gleaming with a wisdom beyond their years. And there, in the kitchen of a mansion that had long been just an empty shell, something new began to blossom. The next morning dawned clear and cool, as though the previous day's storm had washed the world clean. Rick woke up early, something he hadn't done in years. For a moment he lay in bed, watching the sunbeams filter through the curtains and recalling the surreal encounter with the twins. He rose with a determination he hadn't felt in a long time. As he dressed, his eyes fell on the picture frame he had kept face down for years. With trembling hands, he lifted it, gazing at the smiling faces of Emily and Grace. "Maybe," he murmured to the photo, "it's time to do something different." An hour later, Rick found himself standing in front of a modest but well-kept building. A faded sign read, "Hope Haven, a home for young hearts." He took a deep breath, straightened his tie, and took a hesitant step toward the entrance. Inside, the shelter was a stark contrast to Rick's mansion. Where his house was cold and impersonal, Hope Haven was brimming with life and warmth. Colorful drawings decorated the walls, and the sound of children's laughter echoed through the corridors. "May I help you?" A firm yet gentle voice caught his attention. Rick turned to see a middle-aged woman with gray hair in a slightly messy bun and sharp eyes behind thin-framed glasses. Her face showed lines of worry, but also lines of laughter. I'm Richard Thompson," he stammered, suddenly nervous. "I met two of your girls yesterday, Emma and Olivia." The woman's face lit up in recognition. "Ah, the twins. They mentioned meeting someone special yesterday." She extended her hand. "I'm Sarah Jenkins, the director of Hope Haven." Rick shook her hand, noting the calluses, signs of a life of hard work. "It's a pleasure, Mrs. Jenkins. I came because—" He hesitated, realizing he hadn't really planned what to say. Sarah watched him with a mix of curiosity and caution. "Why don't we step into my office?" she suggested, gesturing to a nearby hallway. The office was more like a converted closet, crammed with files and forgotten toys. Sarah settled behind a worn-out desk, indicating for Rick to sit on a rickety chair. "So, Mr. Thompson," Sarah began, her tone now more formal, "what brings you to Hope Haven?" Rick took a deep breath, searching for the right words. "The twins, Emma and Olivia. They touched me deeply yesterday. Their kindness, their light." He paused, feeling his emotions rise in his throat. "They reminded me of my own daughter." Sarah's eyes softened slightly. "I see. The girls have that effect on people." "Yes," Rick agreed, "and it made me realize, well, that maybe I can do something to help." He reached into his suit pocket, pulling out a checkbook. Sarah straightened her posture, visibly more guarded. "Mr. Thompson," she began, her tone cautious, "we appreciate any help, but—" Rick interrupted gently. "Please, call me Rick." He opened the checkbook, picking up a pen. "I'd like to make a substantial donation to the shelter." He began writing, but Sarah raised her hand, stopping him. "Mr. Rick," she corrected. "That's very generous, but I need to ask, why?" Rick blinked, surprised. "Pardon?" Sarah leaned forward, her eyes piercing. "Understand, it's not every day that a stranger appears, offering large sums of money, especially after meeting two of our children." The implication in her words made Rick recoil in shock. I would never—" "It's not like that." "I'm not accusing you of anything," Sarah clarified, her tone firm but not hostile. But my job is to protect these children. I need to understand your motivations." Rick felt a wave of shame and admiration, shame for not having considered how his offer might look, admiration for Sarah's fierce dedication to the children in her care. Slowly, he put the checkbook away. "You're right, of course. I didn't think." He fell silent for a moment, gathering his thoughts. When he spoke again, his voice was laden with emotion. "3 years ago, I lost my wife and daughter in an accident. Since then, I've been lost. I stopped living, really." Sarah listened in silence, her expression softening. "Yesterday," Rick continued, "when Emma and Olivia showed up at my door, it was like a ray of sunshine cutting through the darkness I'd been living in. They reminded me what it is to have a purpose, to feel." He paused, swallowing the lump in his throat. "I want to help, not because I expect anything in return, but because maybe, by helping other children, I can honor my daughter's memory. And maybe I can find some redemption in the process." A heavy silence followed, charged with emotion. Sarah watched him carefully, as if assessing the sincerity of his words. Finally she spoke, her voice gentle. "Thank you for your honesty, Rick. I understand your pain and your desire to do something meaningful." She paused, choosing her next words with care. "But please understand, these children have suffered enough losses. I can't allow them to get attached to someone who might disappear once the novelty wears off." Rick nodded, understanding her concern. "I completely understand, and I respect your caution." He thought for a moment, then continued. "What if, instead of one large donation, I commit to helping regularly? Maybe I could come here, see what you need, get to know the children gradually." Sarah studied him for a long moment before a small smile curved her lips. "That," she said at last, "sounds like a good first step." Rick felt a weight lift from his shoulders. It wasn't exactly what he'd planned, but somehow it felt right. A beginning. A chance to make a difference, slowly. "Thank you," he said sincerely, "for giving me this opportunity." Sarah stood, extending her hand. "Welcome to Hope Haven, Rick. I hope you find what you're looking for here." As he shook her hand, Rick felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope. It was a fragile, tentative feeling, but undeniably present. Exiting Sarah's office, he was greeted again by the sound of children's laughter, and for the first time in a long while, Rick Thompson felt he was on the right path. The path back to the light. Sarah Jenkins sat in her small office at Hope Haven, her brow furrowed as she stared at the computer screen. Something about Richard Thompson intrigued her and at the same time made her uneasy. Her years of experience had taught her to be cautious, especially when it came to the children's safety. With agile fingers, she typed Rick's name into various search engines. Newspaper articles and financial reports appeared, painting the picture of a successful but reclusive tech businessman. The tragedy that took his wife and daughter was mentioned briefly, a footnote in his public story. Sarah leaned back in her chair, thoughtful. The pain in Rick's eyes when he spoke of his loss seemed genuine, but she had seen people use sad stories to manipulate before. She needed to be sure. Meanwhile, at Rick's mansion, a subtle transformation was taking place. The curtains, once perpetually closed, now allowed shafts of sunlight inside. The bouquets from Emma and Olivia, now arranged in proper vases, brought splashes of color to previously monotonous rooms. Rick walked through the house, his steps echoing differently. No longer the heavy tread of a man carrying the weight of the world, but something lighter, almost hesitant, like someone relearning how to occupy space. He stopped at a door he had kept locked for 3 years, Grace's room. His hand settled on the doorknob, trembling slightly. He could hear his daughter's voice in his memory, calling him to play, to read a story, just to be there. "Not yet," he murmured to himself, stepping back. The fear of facing those memories was still too strong. The sound of the doorbell pulled him from his thoughts. Opening the door, he was greeted by the radiant smiles of Emma and Olivia. "Hello, Mr. Rick," they exclaimed in unison. Girls, he replied, an involuntary smile appearing on his face. What brings you here today? Emma lifted a basket covered by a cloth. We brought cookies. Mrs. Jenkins helped us make them. Rick's heart warmed at the gesture, but a pang of worry struck him. Does Mrs. Jenkins know you're here? Olivia nodded vigorously. Of course. She said we could visit as long as we're back before dark. Rick relaxed slightly, inviting them in. As the girls chattered about their day, he found himself watching them with a mixture of joy and melancholy. Something about the way Emma tilted her head when she laughed reminded him of Grace, and the determined manner in which Olivia arranged the cookies on a plate brought Emily to mind. Mr. Rick, Emma's voice drew him back to the present. You look sad again. He blinked, realizing his eyes had filled with tears. No, dear. I'm just remembering. Olivia approached, placing a small hand on his. Remembering can hurt sometimes, but it can also be good. Mrs. Jenkins says our memories are like a garden. We have to care for them so the prettiest flowers can grow. The wisdom in the girl's words caught Rick off guard. He felt something inside him loosen, as if a tight knot were beginning to untie itself. You are very special children, he said gently. Thank you for bringing a little light into this old house. The twins smiled, their faces lighting up in a way that made Rick's heart expand. Back at the shelter, Sarah continued her investigation. A call to an old contact in the police confirmed there was no criminal record under Rick's name. Another call to a friend in social services revealed nothing alarming. Yet something still nagged at her. Why would a man so wealthy and powerful suddenly take an interest in a small children's shelter? Rick's explanation about honoring his daughter's memory seemed plausible, but Sarah had learned the hard way that appearances could be deceiving. Determined to get more information, she picked up the phone and dialed a number. Hello, Mr. Jenkins. This is Susan Thompson from the Ray of Sunshine Shelter. Remember that favor you owe me? Well, I need some information about a certain Robert Mason. While Sarah searched for answers, Rick faced his own inner demons. After the twins left, he found himself standing once more in front of Grace's bedroom door. The fear of opening it was nearly paralyzing, but Olivia's words echoed in his mind. Our memories are like a garden. With a deep breath, he turned the knob. The room was exactly as Grace had left it that fateful morning. Scattered toys, a doll perched on a rocking chair, books stacked on a bedside table. Rick took a hesitant step inside, feeling a wave of memories crash over him. Tears slipped freely down his face as he gently touched each object, each one carrying precious recollections. In a corner, an easel caught his attention. On it, an unfinished drawing, Grace's last. It was a simple scene, a house, a smiling sun, and 3 stick figures representing their small family. Rick traced the lines with trembling fingers as though he could touch Grace's essence through that childish drawing. Then he noticed something in the corner of the paper, almost hidden. Grace had started to draw flowers daisies, her favorites. In that moment, something inside Rick shattered and was put back together. The pain was still there, sharp and deep, but now it was mixed with a tenderness he hadn't allowed himself to feel for years. Oh, Grace, he whispered to the silent room, forgive me for hiding for so long. Meanwhile, at Hope Haven, Sarah hung up the phone, her expression a mixture of relief and shame. Her contact, a retired private investigator, had provided a detailed report on Richard Thompson. There was nothing sinister, no dark secret, only the story of a man who lost everything and withdrew from the world. Sarah leaned back in her chair, reflecting. Perhaps, she thought, the walls of distrust she had built over the years to protect the children were sometimes too high. Maybe it was time to give Richard Thompson a genuine chance. Resolutely, she picked up the phone again, this time for a different call. Hello, Mr. Thompson. This is Sarah Jenkins. I'd like to talk to you again about your offer to help the shelter. How about meeting for coffee tomorrow? As the sun set, casting golden shadows across the city, Two lonely souls, Rick in his mansion and Sarah in her small office, took hesitant steps toward trust and hope. And somewhere in between, two little twins smiled, knowing that their flowers were slowly but surely beginning to blossom. Morning light bathed the small cafe where Rick and Sarah met. The scent of fresh coffee hung in the air, mingling with the aroma of newly baked bread. Rick arrived first, his fingers drumming nervously on the table as he waited. When Sarah entered, he stood abruptly, nearly knocking over his cup. "Mrs. Jenkins, good morning," he greeted, extending his hand. Sarah shook it firmly. "Good morning." "Rick," she corrected, recalling his earlier request. As they settled in, an uncomfortable silence lingered between them. Rick broke it first. I've been thinking a lot about Hope Haven," he began, his voice quiet but determined. "And I'd like to propose something more substantial than just regular donations." Sarah tilted her head, curious. "I'm listening?" Rick took a deep breath before continuing. "I'd like to fund a complete renovation of the shelter, new facilities, modern equipment, maybe even expand to accommodate more children." Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. "That's extremely generous, Rick, but it's also a huge undertaking." "I know," he nodded. "But after visiting, seeing the condition, those kids deserve the best we can offer." Sarah bit her lip, thoughtful. "I agree, the shelter could use improvements, but a complete overhaul. I'm not sure it's necessary or even desirable." Rick frowned in confusion. "But with better facilities, you could help more children, offer more programs." "It's not just about the facilities, Rick," Sarah interrupted gently. "Hope Haven is more than walls and furniture. It has history and memories. The children feel safe there, imperfections and all." Tension began to rise between them, each defending their vision for the shelter's future. Rick, driven by the desire to make a grand impact, and Sarah, guarding the familiar environment she had cultivated over the years. As they argued, neither noticed two small figures approaching their table. "Mr. Rick? Mrs. Jenkins?" The soft voices of Emma and Olivia surprised them. "Girls," Sarah exclaimed, startled. "What are you doing here?" Emma smiled shyly. "We came to buy bread for the shelter. We saw you through the window." Olivia looked from one adult to the other, her expression serious. "You both seem worried. Are you arguing about Hope Haven?" Rick and Sarah exchanged guilty looks. "Yes, dear," Sarah admitted. "We're trying to decide what's best for the shelter." "May I say something?" Emma asked, her voice surprisingly firm. Both adults nodded, intrigued. "Hope Haven is our home," Emma began. "It's not perfect, but it's full of love." "But," Olivia continued, "sometimes when it rains a lot, the roof leaks, and in winter some rooms get really cold, and it would be nice to have more books in the library," Emma added, "and maybe a computer that actually works." Rick and Sarah listened, fascinated by the girls' perspective. But Olivia emphasized, "We don't want it to change so much that it doesn't feel like our home anymore." Emma nodded in agreement. Maybe you could fix things without changing everything." The silence that followed was heavy with reflection. Rick was the first to break it, a gentle smile on his lips. "You know," he said, turning to Sarah, "I think we just got some excellent advice from our young consultants." Sarah chuckled softly, the tension in her shoulders visibly easing. "It seems so. You two are very wise for your age." The twins beamed, proud to have helped. "How about this?" Rick proposed, facing Sarah again. "What if we start with smaller, more urgent improvements? We can evaluate what really needs to be done, listening to the kids and the staff." Sarah nodded slowly. That sounds like a good compromise. We could form a committee, maybe with representatives from the kids, the staff, and you, of course." "I'd love to be part of that," Rick smiled. Then, looking at the twins, "And I think I already know who could represent the children." Emma and Olivia exchanged excited looks. "Well," Sarah said, standing up, "it seems we have a plan." "How about we meet at the shelter tomorrow to start planning?" Rick agreed enthusiastically. As Sarah and the twins said their goodbyes, he watched them leave, a sense of purpose growing in his chest. In the days that followed, Hope Haven buzzed with new energy. A bulletin board was installed in the entrance hall, where children and staff could post suggestions for improvements. Rick spent hours at the shelter, talking to the kids, observing the routines, taking notes. The first changes were subtle but significant. The roof was repaired, eliminating leaks. More efficient heating systems were installed in the colder rooms. The library got new shelves filled with books, donated through a campaign organized by Rick. Each small improvement was celebrated. Rick discovered that he found as much, if not more, satisfaction in these little victories as he had in any business deal he'd ever closed. One afternoon, while overseeing the installation of new computers in the study room, Rick felt a small hand on his arm. It was Olivia. "Mr. Rick," she said softly, "thank you for listening to us. Hope Haven still feels like our home, only better." Rick felt a lump form in his throat. "No, Olivia," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm the one who should thank you. You've taught me something very important." "What?" Emma asked, joining them. Rick smiled, looking around at the shelter that was slowly transforming. That sometimes the greatest changes begin with the smallest steps, and that a home isn't just a place, but the people who make it special. The twins smiled, their eyes shining with understanding. At that moment, Rick realized it wasn't just Hope Haven that was undergoing a metamorphosis. He was changing too, blooming again after a long emotional winter. As the sun set, casting a golden glow through the newly cleaned windows of the shelter, Rick felt a peace he hadn't experienced in years. The Metamorphosis project was only beginning, but it was already transforming more than just a building. It was rebuilding hearts and renewing hopes. Sarah's office at Hope Haven was lit by the soft glow of the setting sun. She glanced over a stack of old documents, part of her ongoing research on Richard Thompson. Her initial mistrust had faded, but she still sensed there was more to his story than met the eye. A yellowed file caught her attention. It was a record of a donation made decades ago by a rising company. The name of the CEO made Sarah pause. Richard Thompson. Intrigued, she delved deeper into the records. As she connected the dots, a surprising picture began to emerge. Her hands trembled slightly when she found one particularly revealing document. Outside, the sound of children's laughter mingled with Rick's deep voice, drifting through the window. She stood, walking over to look outside. There, in the courtyard, Rick was helping some children plant flowers in a new garden bed. Sarah watched for a moment, noticing the kindness in his interactions, the care with which he guided the small hands at work. There was a familiarity in his gestures, as if he had done this before, long ago. Making a decision, Susan picked up the file and walked downstairs. "Rick," she called softly, approaching the group. "Could we talk for a moment?" He looked up, a genuine smile on his face, so different from the guarded expression he'd worn when they first met. "Of course, Sarah." "Kids, keep planting. I'll be right back." They stepped away, stopping under the shade of an old tree. "What's wrong?" Rick asked, noticing Sarah's serious demeanor. She hesitated before showing him the file. "I found something in our old records, a donation made by you over 30 years ago." Rick tensed, his gaze fixed on the document. "Ah," he said quietly. "I suspected that would surface eventually." Sarah studied him carefully. "Rick, you've been here before, haven't you? Not just as a donor?" He closed his eyes briefly, as though gathering courage. When he opened them, they were filled with subdued emotions. "Yes," he admitted. "I grew up in a foster home much like Hope Haven. In fact, it was in this same neighborhood, though that building no longer exists." Sarah's heart clenched. "Why didn't you tell us sooner?" Rick shrugged, a gesture loaded with years of unspoken pain. "At first, it didn't seem relevant. And later, well, it's a part of my life I spent a long time trying to forget." They walked over to a nearby bench, sitting side by side. The sounds of the children playing seemed distant now, as though they were in a separate bubble of time. "It wasn't easy," Rick continued quietly, "growing up without a family, without a place to really call home. I promised myself that if I ever found success, I'd do something to help kids like me." Susan nodded, understanding. "Is that what brought you back now?" Rick let out a heavy sigh. "Partially. But the truth is, I forgot that promise. For a long time, I was so focused on building my life, my family." His voice failed, and Sarah instinctively placed a hand over his. "You don't have to go on if you don't want to," she said softly. But Rick shook his head. "No, it's time I talked about it. 3 years ago, I lost my wife, Emily, and our daughter, Grace, in a car accident. I should have been with them, but I was stuck in a business meeting." Tears now flowed freely down Rick's face, but he kept speaking. "After that, I shut down. I isolated myself from the world. I spent the last 3 years living like a ghost in my own life." Sarah felt her own eyes fill with tears. "Oh, Rick, I'm so sorry." He gave a sad smile. "I am too. But then, on that rainy day, Emma and Olivia showed up at my door, and suddenly it was like I could breathe again." Sarah squeezed his hand gently. "They have that effect on people." Rick nodded. "They reminded me of my promise, of the kid I used to be, and I realized that maybe, by helping other children, I could find a way back to myself." A comfortable silence fell between them, filled only by the distant sounds of the shelter. "Thank you for sharing that with me, Rick," Sarah finally said. I feel like I understand you a lot better now." He turned to look at her, his eyes searching hers. "I should have been honest from the start. I'm sorry I didn't trust you earlier." Sarah shook her head. "No, I understand. Sometimes carrying our own story can be too heavy." In that moment, something changed between them. The last barrier of mistrust dissolved, replaced by a mutual understanding born of shared experiences and acknowledged pain. "You know," Sarah said, a small smile playing on her lips, "I think I finally understand why the twins' flowers chose you that day." Rick raised an eyebrow, curious. "Why?" "Because you, more than anyone, understand what these kids are going through. You lived it. And now you have the chance to make the difference you always wanted to make." Sarah's words hit Rick deeply. He felt something loosen in his chest, a tension he had carried for so long that he hardly noticed it anymore. "Thank you, Sarah," he said, his voice shaky, "for giving me this chance, for believing in me, even when I didn't believe in myself." She smiled, a smile full of understanding and compassion. "That's what Hope Haven is for, Rick. To give second chances, to heal broken hearts." As the sun sank completely, casting long shadows across the courtyard, Rick and Sarah remained seated in companionable silence. The truths revealed that afternoon had forged a bridge between them, a bond of mutual understanding and respect. And in the heart of the shelter, the children's laughter continued, a constant reminder of the important work they had ahead and of the hope that blossoms even in the most unlikely places. Early the next morning, Sarah Jenkins received the news that made her blood run cold. An official letter, stamped with the city council seal, lay on her desk. Her hands trembled as she read and reread the contents, barely believing the printed words. Hope Haven was at risk of being shut down. New municipal regulations required extensive renovations and upgrades to every orphanage and shelter in the city. The deadline was short, and the costs were astronomical. For a small, resource-limited institution like Hope Haven, it looked like a death sentence. Sarah let the letter fall onto the desk, feeling the weight of the world on her shoulders. How could she tell the children? How would she explain that the only home many of them knew could be taken away? A soft knock on the door pulled her from her dark thoughts. It was Rick, arriving for another day of volunteer work. "Good morning, Say." He stopped short at the look on her face. What happened? Wordlessly, Sarah slid the letter toward him. Rick picked it up, his eyes scanning the lines quickly. As he read, his expression shifted from confusion to incredulity, and finally to determination. "This can't happen," he declared, his voice firm. "We won't let it happen." Sarah felt a spark of hope ignite in her chest. But how? The required renovations? The costs are astronomical, Rick. We don't have the resources. Rick placed the letter back on the desk, his eyes shining with an intensity Sarah hadn't seen before. Maybe we don't have them now, but we have something more valuable: time and determination. He began pacing in the small office, his mind clearly racing. I'll use my contacts, see if I can get the deadline extended. Meanwhile, we can start fundraising, seeking corporate donations. Rick, Sarah interjected gently, I appreciate your optimism, but you don't understand bureaucratic battles. They can drag on for months, even years. And in the meantime, the children will be in limbo, not knowing if they'll still have a home tomorrow. The sound of children's laughter drifted through the open window. Outside, the kids were starting their day, unaware of the threat looming over their home. Rick moved closer to the window, watching the scene for a moment. When he turned back to Sarah, there was a renewed determination in his eyes. Then we'll fight this battle on every possible front, he declared. I'll use my influence in business and politics. We'll rally the community, and most importantly, we'll keep hope alive for these children. Sarah felt a knot form in her throat, touched by Rick's passion. Okay, she said softly. Where do we start? In the weeks that followed, Hope Haven turned into a hub of frenetic activity. Rick spent hours on the phone, negotiating with city officials, lawyers, and potential donors. Sarah coordinated on-site efforts, organizing fundraising events, and mobilizing volunteers. But it was Emma and Olivia who surprised everyone with their initiative. When they learned of the threat to the shelter, the twins refused to sit idly by. We can do a campaign, Emma exclaimed one day, her eyes shining with excitement. Yes, Olivia agreed. We can tell everyone in the neighborhood how important Hope Haven is. Sarah and Rick exchanged surprised but encouraging looks. And how would you do that, girls? Sarah asked. With flowers, of course, the twins replied in unison. Thus began the Flowers of Hope campaign. Emma and Olivia, with help from the other children, started creating small paper flower bouquets, each accompanied by a note explaining the shelter's situation and asking for support. Rick was impressed by the children's creativity and determination. You know, he said to Sarah one day, watching the twins lead a group in crafting the flowers, I think we underestimated the power these kids have to touch people's hearts. Sarah nodded, a proud smile on her face. They never cease to amaze me. Maybe this is what we need to turn things around, reminding people that we're not just fighting for a building, but for lives. The twins' campaign quickly gained momentum. Local residents, touched by the paper bouquets and the children's stories, began to mobilize. Shops displayed signs of support, schools organized fundraisers, and the local media started covering the story. Rick, for his part, used his behind-the-scenes influence. Meetings with city council members, negotiations with contractors willing to offer discounts on necessary renovations, and even a hearing with the mayor were arranged. But the battle was far from won. For every step forward, it seemed there were two new obstacles: tight deadlines, seemingly impossible bureaucratic demands, and the constant threat of closure weighed on everyone. One night, after a particularly frustrating day of fruitless negotiations, Rick found himself alone in the shelter's courtyard, the weight of the responsibility he'd assumed feeling crushing. Mr. Rick? A gentle voice pulled him from his thoughts. It was Emma, holding one of the paper bouquets. Hello, Emma, he smiled wearily. What are you doing up so late? The girl approached, extending the bouquet to him. I thought you might need this. Rick took the paper flowers, feeling a lump in his throat. Thank you, dear. But why do you think I need it? Emma shrugged, her eyes wise beyond her years. Because sometimes even grown-ups need to be reminded there's hope. The child's words struck Rick deeply. He pulled Emma into a hug, feeling warm tears roll down his cheeks. You're right, Emma, he whispered. Sometimes we forget. When they parted, Rick saw the same resolve in the girl's eyes. We're not giving up, Mr. Rick. Hope Haven is our home, and we're going to fight for it." In that moment, watching Emma's small figure return to the shelter, Rick felt his own resolve sharpen. They weren't just fighting regulation and bureaucracy. They were fighting for these children's future, for their dreams and hopes. The next morning, when Sarah arrived at the shelter, she found Rick already in her office, surrounded by papers and with the phone pressed to his ear. "Good morning," she said, noting the renewed energy in his eyes. "Any news?" Rick covered the phone's mouthpiece with his hand. "Maybe. I'm talking to a friend on the city council. I think we might have a chance to present our case directly to the zoning committee." Sarah felt a flicker of hope. That would be amazing. But how did you manage that? Rick smiled, his eyes drifting to the window where the children were gathering for another day of campaigning. Let's just say I was reminded of the power of hope and determination. As the sun rose over Hope Haven, lighting up the children's smiling faces and their brightly colored paper bouquets, one thing became clear. The battle was far from over, but with united hearts and unwavering determination, there was hope. And sometimes that was all they needed to keep going. The sky was overcast on that autumn morning, as if nature itself mirrored Rick's mood. He stood at the cemetery gates, his hands trembling slightly as he held a bouquet of daisies, Grace's favorite. "Are you sure you want to do this today?" Sarah's gentle voice drew him from his thoughts. Rick nodded slowly, not taking his eyes off the path ahead. "I've put it off long enough," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "I'll be here with you all the way." With a deep sigh, Rick took the first step. The crunch of gravel beneath his feet sounded oddly loud in the cemetery's hush. Each step felt like an effort, as though he were fighting an invisible force pulling him back. As they approached the spot, long-suppressed memories flooded Rick's mind. Emily's melodic laughter echoing through the house, Grace's pure joy when she learned to ride a bike, the last morning they spent together, with promises of a weekend picnic that never happened. Finally, they arrived at the headstones, side by side, Emily and Grace Thompson, resting under the shade of an old oak tree. Rick felt his legs fail, and Sarah quickly supported him, helping him to sit on a nearby bench. For a long time, Rick simply stared at the headstones, unable to speak. The tears he had held back for so long began to flow freely. "I'm so sorry," he finally whispered, his voice shaky. "I should have been there. I should have." Sarah gently squeezed his hand, offering silent support. Rick placed the daisies carefully between the two headstones. "Grace loved these flowers," he said softly. "She used to say they were like little suns, always smiling at us." A sad smile crossed his face as the memory enveloped him. "I remember one day, just before the accident, Grace had filled the entire yard with daisies. Emily was a bit upset at first, but then Grace said, 'Mom, look how many smiles I planted for us.' And the three of us laughed so hard." His voice broke, interrupted by a sob. Sarah slipped her arm around Rick's shoulders, offering comfort. "They would have loved what you're doing at Hope Haven," Sarah said softly. "Especially Grace." Rick nodded, wiping his tears. She had such a big heart, always wanting to help others. He paused, taking a deep breath. "Sometimes, when I'm with the kids at the shelter, I see a bit of her in each one of them." Silence fell again, broken only by the occasional call of a distant bird. Rick seemed to be gathering his courage for something. "I've blamed myself for so long," he finally admitted, his voice barely audible. "If I hadn't been stuck in that stupid meeting, if I had gone with them—" "Rick," Sarah squeezed his hand. "You couldn't have known. Accidents happen. No one's to blame." He shook his head, fresh tears welling in his eyes. "But I should have been there. I should have protected them. It was my job, and I failed." "You didn't fail," Sarah said firmly. "You loved them, and they knew that. That's what matters." Rick remained silent for a long moment, absorbing Sarah's words. When he spoke again, his voice trembled with emotion. "You know, in the first months after the accident, I could barely function. I buried myself in work, trying not to think or feel. Then one day I realized I couldn't remember the sound of Grace's laughter anymore. He paused, swallowing hard. That's when I started shutting down completely. I was so afraid of forgetting, of losing the memories I had left, that I stopped living, as if moving on was somehow betraying their memory. Sarah listened intently, her heart breaking for Rick's obvious pain. "But now you're here," she said gently. "You're confronting this. It's a big step, Rick." He nodded slowly. "It's hard. But being at Hope Haven, seeing those kids, made me realize that maybe there's a way to honor Emily and Grace's memory without losing myself entirely in the past." A ray of sunlight broke through the clouds at that moment, illuminating the headstones and making the daisies glow. Rick looked up, a small smile forming on his lips. "Looks like they're giving us a sign," he said, his voice a little lighter. Sarah smiled. "Maybe they are. Maybe they're saying it's okay to move on, that they want you to be happy." Rick was silent for a moment, contemplating. Then, slowly, he stood, moving closer to the headstones. He placed a hand on each of them, closing his eyes. "Emily, Grace," he said softly, "I miss you both so much, every day. But I think it's time I try to live again, to do something good with the time I have left. I hope you can forgive me for taking so long to see that." He opened his eyes, looking at Sarah. "Thank you for being here with me today. I don't think I could have done this alone." Sarah stood, joining him. "That's what friends are for, Rick, and I'm sure Emily and Grace are proud of you right now." As they prepared to leave, Rick cast one last look at the headstones. "I'll be back soon," he promised, "and I'll bring news about Hope Haven. I think you'd both like to hear about the kids." Leaving the cemetery, Rick felt as though a huge weight had been lifted from his shoulders. The grief was still there, the pain of loss still real, but it felt more bearable now. He had confronted his ghosts, begun to process the guilt that had consumed him for so long. "How do you feel?" Sarah asked gently as they walked back to the car. Rick thought for a moment before replying. "Like I can breathe again," he said. "It hurts, but it's also freeing, in a way." Sarah nodded sympathetically. "Grief is a journey, Rick. There's no deadline, no right or wrong way to handle it. But I'm proud of you for taking this step." As they got in the car, Rick glanced once more at the cemetery. "You know," he said, "for the first time in years, I feel like Emily and Grace would approve of what I'm doing. Like in some way, I'm honoring their memory." Sarah smiled, starting the engine. "I'm sure they do, Rick, and I'm sure they're rooting for you, and for Hope Haven, wherever they are." Pulling away, Rick felt a swirl of emotions: sadness, relief, hope. But above all, he felt a renewed determination. The battle for Hope Haven was not yet won, but he now knew he wasn't fighting alone. He had Sarah, the children, and in some way, he felt he had Emily and Grace's blessing as well. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, Rick Thompson felt truly ready to face it. City Hall was packed that morning, a nervous murmur filling the air, as Rick, Sarah, and a group of children from Hope Haven, Emma and Olivia among them, took their seats in the front rows. The tension was palpable. Everyone knew the shelter's fate would be decided today. Rick adjusted his tie, feeling the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. He glanced at Sarah, who offered an encouraging smile, then at the children, their faces a mix of anxiety and hope. The judge entered the chamber, and a sudden hush fell over the assembly. "We are here today," he began, "to discuss the future of the Hope Haven shelter in light of the new municipal regulations." The next few hours were a roller coaster of emotions. City representatives laid out their arguments for closing the shelter, citing regulations and costs. Sarah countered passionately, detailing the shelter's importance to the community and the improvements already made. Then came the testimonies. One by one, community members stood to speak. There was the local grocer who described how the Hope Haven kids always helped him carry deliveries. The retired teacher who volunteered at the shelter spoke of the children's bright eyes when they learned something new. But it was the children's own testimonies that truly touched everyone's hearts. Tommy, a 10-year-old boy, told how the shelter took him in after he lost his parents. "It's the only place where I don't feel alone," he said, his voice trembling slightly. Mia, a shy teenager, spoke about how the shelter helped her overcome her fear of trusting people. "They showed me there's still kindness in the world," she said, wiping away a tear. Then Emma and Olivia stood up together. The judge offered a kind smile to the twins. "What would you like to say?" Emma took a step forward. "Hope Haven isn't just a building," she began. "It's our home, our family," Olivia continued. "It's where we learned that even when life is hard, we can always find a ray of hope." The simple but profound words of the girls brought tears to many in the audience. Rick felt his heart tighten, recalling how the twins had changed his own life. Finally, it was Rick's turn to speak. He rose slowly, his eyes scanning the room before resting on the judge. "Your Honor," he began, his voice steady despite the emotion, "a few months ago, I was a very different man. Isolated, bitter, lost. Then, on a rainy afternoon, 2 small messengers appeared at my door." He smiled at Emma and Olivia before continuing. "They brought me more than flowers that day. They brought hope, light, and a reminder of what truly matters in life." Rick paused, his voice thick with emotion. "Hope Haven is not just a shelter, it's a beacon of hope. It's a place where broken children find healing, where the lonely find family. It's a place of second chances, not just for the kids, but for people like me too." He looked directly at the judge. "We're asking for our second chance, the chance to show that Hope Haven isn't just a building in need of renovations, but a home that transforms lives. Give us this chance, and I promise we'll do everything in our power to meet and exceed every regulation to make Hope Haven a model for other shelters." The room fell silent as Rick finished, the emotion of his words lingering in the air. The judge seemed deeply moved, but before he could speak, a voice called from the back of the room. "Wait, I need to speak." All heads turned to see a middle-aged woman making her way down the aisle. Her vivid green eyes were fixed on Emma and Olivia. "Who are you?" the judge asked, frowning. "My name is Jennifer," the woman replied, her voice trembling slightly. I'm Emma and Olivia's aunt." A murmur of surprise rippled through the chamber. Sarah stood abruptly. "How is that possible? The girls have no known living relatives." Jennifer wiped away a tear. "I'm their mother's sister. I've been out of the country for years, working as a volunteer in conflict zones. When I came back and found out what happened to my sister, well, it took me months to track the girls here." Emma and Olivia looked at the woman with a mixture of confusion and fascination. Rick felt his heart clench. After everything they had done to save the shelter, this new complication threatened to change everything. The judge cleared his throat, regaining everyone's attention. "Well, this certainly adds a new dimension to the case. Ms. Jennifer, I assume you're here to request custody of the girls?" Jennifer hesitated, her eyes moving between the twins and the Hope Haven group. I came to meet them to see if they're all right. But hearing all this, seeing everything people have said about the shelter," she turned to Sarah and Rick. "You clearly love these children, and they seem happy here." Rick stepped forward, his heart pounding. "Ms. Jennifer, I understand you want to be part of the girls' lives, but Hope Haven is their family now. Maybe we can find a way for you to be part of that too." Sarah nodded, adding, "Our doors are always open for family. Perhaps we can discuss some form of shared custody." The judge watched the scene unfold, a thoughtful expression on his face. Finally, he spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen, it's clear Hope Haven is more than just a building. It's a community, a family. And as we've just witnessed, families can take many forms." He paused, looking at each face in the room. "I propose the following. We give Hope Haven 6 months to carry out the necessary renovations and comply with the new regulations. During that period, Ms. Jennifer will have the opportunity to reintegrate into her niece's lives under the shelter's supervision." A collective sigh of relief filled the room. Rick felt a wave of emotion wash over him. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was a second chance for the shelter, for the children, and in a way, for himself. As the session adjourned and people began to rise, Rick saw Emma and Olivia run to embrace Jennifer. But to his surprise, the girls soon returned to him and Sarah, wrapping them in a tight hug. "See, Mr. Rick?" Emma whispered. The flowers were right. They always know where hearts need healing. Rick smiled, feeling tears of relief and gratitude in his eyes. The road ahead would still be challenging, but looking at the smiling faces around him, Sarah, the children, even Jennifer, he knew they would not be alone on this journey. Hope Haven would continue to shine, brighter than ever. Sarah's office at Hope Haven felt smaller than ever, with Rick, Jennifer, and the twins cramped into the space alongside the director. Tension hung in the air, each adult trying to mask their anxiety for the children's sake. Jennifer was the first to break the silence. "I know this is complicated," she began, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "But they are my family, my last link to my sister." Rick felt his heart constrict. He looked at Emma and Olivia sitting quietly on the sofa, their small hands clasped together. In a few months, these girls had become such an integral part of his life that the thought of losing them was almost unbearable. Sarah leaned forward, her professional tone barely hiding her own worries. "Jennifer, we understand your position, but we also have to consider what's best for the girls. They've built a life here, friends, stability." "And I can offer that," Jennifer interjected, a hint of desperation in her voice. "A home, a family." "We are their family," Rick said softly, surprising himself with the emotion in his voice. The twins shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances. Emma spoke first. "Can we say something?" The adults paused, turning their attention to the girls. Sarah nodded encouragingly. "Of course, dear. What do you think about all this?" Olivia took a deep breath before replying. We love Hope Haven. It's our home. Mr. Rick and Mrs. Jenkins, you're like parents to us." Emma continued. "But also, we've always dreamed of having a real family, someone who was really ours." The girls' words hung in the air, each adult feeling their impact differently. Jennifer seemed hopeful, while Rick and Sarah struggled to hide their pain. "Maybe," Sarah said slowly, "we can find a middle ground, something that lets Jennifer be part of the girls' lives without taking them completely out of the environment they know." Rick nodded, an idea taking shape. What if we proposed some kind of shared custody?" Jennifer frowned. "What do you mean?" "Well," Rick elaborated carefully, "you could have legal custody of the girls, but they'd continue living at Hope Haven, at least for now. You could visit regularly, take them for weekends and holidays." "That would give the girls time to adjust," Sarah added, "and allow us all to work together to create the best situation for them." Jennifer was silent for a moment, considering the proposal. Her emotions were visible on her face, the desire to have her nieces with her, battling the realization that a sudden change might be traumatic. "What do you girls think?" Jennifer finally asked, turning to Emma and Olivia. The twins exchanged another glance, a silent conversation passing between them. Olivia answered, We'd like that. We could get to know you better, Aunt Jennifer, but still stay with our friends and our family here." Emma nodded in agreement. "We could have two families, right? One here and one with Aunt Jennifer." The simplicity and wisdom in the girl's logic brought tears to the adults' eyes. Jennifer composed herself first. I think that could work," she said slowly. "I want what's best for the girls, and if that means sharing, well, I'm willing to try." Rick felt a wave of relief wash over him. He looked at Sarah, who seemed equally relieved. "So we're all in agreement?" she asked, looking around the room. There was a round of nods, including the twins. "Great," Sarah continued. "We'll work out the legal and practical details. In the meantime, Jennifer, why don't you spend some time with the girls? Get to know them better, let them get to know you." Jennifer smiled for the first time since the meeting began. "I'd love that." As Jennifer left with the twins for a walk in the shelter's garden, Rick collapsed into a chair, exhausted. "That was intense," he murmured. Sarah nodded, rubbing her temples. "Yes, but I think we reached a good solution. It's not perfect, but it's what's best for the girls," Rick finished, "and ultimately, that's what matters." They fell silent for a moment, looking through the window as Jennifer, Emma, and Olivia strolled among the flowers, chatting cheerfully. "You know," Rick said quietly, "when the twins showed up at my door that rainy day, I never imagined my life would change this much, that I'd care this much." Sarah smiled, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "It's amazing how these children can slip into our hearts, isn't it?" Rick nodded, feeling a tumult of emotions. Joy, fear, hope. "Do you think this will work? This arrangement? Honestly?" "I don't know," Sarah replied. "But I think we all want what's best for Emma and Olivia. And as long as we keep that in mind, we'll find a way to make it work." Outside, the twins' laughter echoed through the garden, mingling with Jennifer's gentle voice. It was a scene filled with possibilities and new beginnings. Rick smiled, feeling a peace he hadn't felt in years. "You're right," he said. "Together, we'll make it work. For them." And so, on that sunny afternoon, a new family began to form, unconventional, perhaps a bit complicated, but full of love and possibility. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, everyone involved looked to it with hope and determination. The early morning sun cast a golden glow over Hope Haven, now almost unrecognizable after months of renovations. The worn-out old building had given way to a modern, welcoming structure, its walls painted in soft, cheerful hues. In the newly planted and thriving garden, a shiny sign read, "Hope Haven Foundation, a home for all hearts." Richard "Rick" Thompson stood at the entrance, watching the children excitedly run across the new playground, his heart filled with an emotion he could barely recall a year ago. Pure and simple joy. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Sarah's voice drew him from his thoughts. She joined him, a look of satisfaction on her face. Rick nodded, his voice tight with emotion. "It's more than I ever could have imagined." Familiar laughter caught his attention. Emma and Olivia were running toward them, followed closely by Jennifer, all carrying bouquets of bright flowers. "Mr. Rick! Mrs. Jenkins!" the twins shouted in unison. "Look what we picked for today's ceremony." Rick crouched to their level, admiring the bouquets. "They're lovely, girls. I'm sure they'll brighten everyone's day." Jennifer smiled, placing a hand on each niece's shoulder. They insisted on waking up at dawn to find the prettiest flowers. "Well," Sarah said, "we have a lot to celebrate today, don't we?" Indeed, the day marked not only the official reopening of Hope Haven, but also the formalization of the shared custody agreement between Rick, Sarah, and Jennifer. It had been a journey full of challenges, but the result exceeded all expectations. As the children ran back to the garden, Rick found himself reflecting on the events of the past months, the legal fight to save the shelter, the tense negotiation over Emma and Olivia's future, and finally, the surprising solution that emerged. The idea of shared custody had evolved into something deeper. Rick, Sarah, and Jennifer had become a unit, a non-traditional family united by their love for the twins and for all the children at Hope Haven. "It's almost time," Sarah reminded him, checking her watch. "We'd better get ready for the ceremony." Rick nodded, straightening his tie. In just a few minutes, he'd be standing before a crowd of supporters, donors, and city officials to officially announce the creation of the Hope Haven Foundation. When the moment arrived, Rick stepped onto the small stage set up in the garden, feeling the weight of everyone's gaze upon him. He took a deep breath, drawing strength from the sight of Emma and Olivia, smiling encouragingly in the front row. "A year ago," he began, his voice firm despite the emotion, "I was a very different man. Isolated, bitter, without purpose. Then, on a rainy day, two little messengers appeared at my door. His eyes found Emma and Olivia, who beamed back at him. They brought me more than flowers that day. They brought me hope, light, and a reminder of what truly matters. Rick paused, looking out at the gathered crowd. Today, we're here not just to reopen Hope Haven, but to launch something much bigger. The Hope Haven Foundation will be dedicated to supporting orphan children all across the country. We'll provide resources, education, and above all, love and care to those who need it most. Applause echoed through the garden. Rick saw tears in the eyes of Sarah and Jennifer, who stood side by side, their hands clasped with Emma's and Olivia's. This place, Rick went on, gesturing at the renovated shelter, is not just a building. It's a home, a family, a beacon of hope. And it is with great joy that I announce our family has grown a bit more. He motioned for Sarah, Jennifer, and the twins to join him on stage. Through extraordinary circumstances and a lot of love, we formed a non-traditional but deeply united family. Sarah, Jennifer, and I will share custody not just of Emma and Olivia, but of every child who passes through these doors. There were murmurs of surprise and approval from the audience. Because in the end, Rick concluded, his voice thick with emotion, that's what Hope Haven is all about. Building families, giving second chances, spreading love and hope wherever we can. When the applause finally subsided and the official ceremony ended, Rick watched with a full heart as Emma and Olivia ran through the garden, handing out their flowers to each person present. "They really do have a gift, don't they?" Jennifer commented, joining him. Rick nodded, smiling. "They changed my life completely. Gave me a purpose, a family." "Gave us a family," Sarah gently corrected, coming closer. "All of us." As the sun rose higher in the sky, bathing Hope Haven in golden light, Rick felt a deep peace settle in his heart. The road that led here hadn't been easy, but every challenge, every obstacle, had been worth it. He watched the twins hand out the last of their flowers, their faces radiant with joy. At that moment, Rick knew with absolute certainty that he had found his true purpose in life. "You know," he said softly to Sarah and Jennifer, "I think I finally understand what Emma and Olivia meant on that first day." "What?" Jennifer asked, curious. Rick smiled, tears of joy shining in his eyes. "That sometimes all it takes to heal a broken heart is a simple act of kindness, a bouquet of flowers delivered in the rain." And as the new day unfolded around them, full of promises and possibilities, Rick Thompson knew he had finally found his home, his family, and his own ray of sunshine.